Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Catholic Mama, and this is not your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn. This is her husband, because we are doing a podcast takeover where I have invited myself on the show yet again, more aggressively than usual this time, to interview my wife, to interview the original host of the show, Christine, on an exciting topic, which is the dangers of being spiritual but not religious. So sit down and cozy up, because I'm sure this is going to be a very fun and fascinating conversation, and I hope I don't blow it, because I really want to keep coming back on the show. So without any further ado, welcome to the Catholic Mama, Christine.
Thank you for having me, Pat. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on the show and talk about myself.
It is a true delight, and we have to take advantage of it because our kids have been deposited pretty much to ourselves. We have baby Marin here.
And a St. Bernard.
And a St. Bernard, and we decided, of all things, to do a podcast.
The couple that podcasts together stays together.
So we have our topic in hand, but what's new? What's going on?
Oh, well, what an intro. How about let's talk about you for a second here.
Oh,
and our recent.
That you would never ask.
Yeah, that's it. Well, actually, first off, so we drove about 1,300 miles in 4 days with 4 kids in the car, including a 6-week-old baby. Mm-hmm. So before we talk about why we were on that trip, I do want to give props to the 6-week-old, because she rocked it.
She did a great job.
She was the least she was the least annoying out of everybody.
She's very gentle to us. She is a sweet baby. Thank you.
Thank you. But we survived our jaunt across the Midwest, and the reason for it was very exciting was because Pat, the podcast host here, was invited to be on EWTN's show, The Journey Home.
That's right. With Marcus Grodi.
Which we've watched the show a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun to actually see you in the studio. Well, I saw a picture of you. I just dropped you off. Went back to the hotel.
My chauffeur.
Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, why don't you tell us a little about that?
It was great. I got an email from the producer a few months ago asking if I would come on, and they offered to fly me out, but we decided we wanted to make a road trip of it, see some friends in Michigan, which was a delightful good time, and I'm glad we did that. And I thought it went really well. I mean, Marcus was so easy to talk to. You get there, for people who've seen the show, the studio will look familiar in the little red cup. I told him how excited I was, how many people I've seen drinking out of that, and made sure they washed it. Asked how many. They probably thought it was annoying.
Well, yeah, what is The Journey Home?
Oh, yeah. So for people who aren't familiar, this is a segment that's been on EWTN for over 20 years, from what I understand. And they interview people who have either come into the Catholic Church or have come back to the Catholic Church. And they have people from all kinds of different backgrounds, Protestants who convert, people from any of the world religions who come into the faith, and then people like me as well, from a skeptical or non-religious background, or who've fallen away from the faith and come back. So it's an hour-long conversation. We covered a lot of territory, just the sort of spiritual but not religious nature of the millennial generation, which we're going to talk about. We kind of jammed on that for a little bit, then unpacked a lot of my own journey. I argued a lot for the intellectual richness and philosophical rigor of the Catholic tradition and how appealing that was to me. We spent a good amount of time on the Eucharist as well, and how that really moved me to the Catholic faith. So I really enjoyed it. It should air hopefully later January. I think the tentative date is January 20th, and obviously you can catch it right on EWTN if you have that as part of your cable package subscription. But if not, no worries, because they typically put all of the episodes up on YouTube as well.
Which is where we watch it typically.
Yeah, we usually just stream it from YouTube to see what's up, see what's going on. So Marin's nursing, and we'll try and continue on with the show here. But the topic, of course, is, I think she just corrupted her diaper, folks. So we're going to take a quick 2-minute break, and we'll be right back with you. And we are back. Marin has a fresh diaper, and we are ready to continue the conversation. We're making do with what we have here, friends. So our topic, and this was something that we were talking about on, that's the great thing about road trips. You have all this time to brainstorm podcast topics. What do you want to talk about next time? And we podcast topics. What do you want to talk about next time? And we really wanted to emphasize what kind of is the default, I guess, religious affiliation, or more so religious non-affiliation among the younger generations, and specifically millennials, which is this idea of being spiritual, but not religious.
Yes, and it's not something that I talk a lot about when we dive into my conversion story, because by the last couple of years before I converted to Catholicism, I had become a skeptic and really despondent about my final end and what the meaning of everything was. But I really spent most of my time throughout my life as a spiritual but not religious person, and because of that, really thought that I was better than everybody else.
The funny thing we discovered is we had a sort of inverse in the sense that I was really skeptical for a very, very long time. Then I had a very short period of being spiritual but not religious, and then I became Catholic. You were spiritual but not religious for a very long time, and you had a very short period of being very skeptical, and then you became Catholic.
Yeah, that arrogance still carried over to when I was a skeptic, though, and you were starting to question if the universe, the life force, or whatever it was, and the different philosophies you were researching. And I mean, I don't know if you recall, but there were a lot of times you would come up with something like, yeah, I know, been there, done that.
I recall, yeah.
Yeah, I was a real jerk.
Yeah, you were pretty good at the hand waving, friend.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's unpack this. Where do you want to begin with this? Because I want to focus. I want to focus on your story and how this really shaped and affected your life before you became Catholic.
Yeah. So it wasn't until I was doing some research after we converted about just the general state of Catholics in America that I came across the phrase cultural Catholic or bless you. All right. The baby sneezed. Cultural Catholic. So because of everybody in my extended family either being raised Catholic and left, or still being relatively good practicing Catholics, I guess, anytime somebody would say something about Catholicism, I'd be like, oh, I get that. Catholic guilt. I understand. My family's Catholic. It was never, I was never Catholic. But I think where the beginning would be a good place to start, because I do remember as a kid thinking about God, knowing that he existed, and at that point it was a he. God was who he was. I didn't quite understand all of it. I didn't go to the Sunday school like my Catholic best friend did. But I still had a sense of God. We had this great expanse of forest. But back there, we created, a whole little town and houses, and we had a church, and it had an altar, and we prayed to God there. Nothing like weird pagan. It was Mary, and we had a sense of Mary, my friend and I, and we had Jesus there. But for whatever reason, I always gravitated towards the Old Testament. That seemed to be more more valid than what I knew of the New. But it was probably because I was being bombarded by a lot of rapture, Bible thumping Baptists. Yeah, Southern Baptists, because I grew up in the Bible Belt. So the Old Testament seemed more legitimate to me.
Seemed a little removed from all that stuff.
Right.
Maybe it was a little
and more serious. And that was another thing. Despite how I wound up feeling about Catholicism in general, or specifically, or Christianity on the whole, I always thought that you should take it seriously. And the Christians that I was surrounded with in the Bible Belt didn't seem to do that. They seemed to make Jesus out to be
chummy.
Yeah, chummy. Yeah. Or they were really hateful about him. So either way, it didn't make sense to me, and I rebelled against any of it. I think the point to begin with there, though, is that everybody has this sense that there is a divine nature to the universe and to ourselves. And I just didn't know, without proper catechesis and a good guiding hand from close family or church, I really had no idea where to take that.
Yeah.
So I had a sense of God. My aunt had given me her children's Bible from, I think when she was a kid. So it was published in the 1960s, and I loved it. I loved the way the book felt, and I loved the way the pages smelled, and it had a good heft to it. And I always liked going through and looking at these very dramatic illustrations in the book. And I even watched the Song of Bernadette when I was a kid and told my mom I wanted to be a nun, which she just laughed off, and I just shrugged and said, oh, okay, I guess I don't want to be a nun, and went off on wanting to be a chef or a writer or whatever else. But it just really goes to show, like, this all started from a good place, that I really was interested in God, and he was a part of my life, but without the proper direction, I just started making it up as I went.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I know that that both of your parents, did they both go to Catholic school, or did they go to public school?
My mom went to public school, but my dad went to Catholic school.
Okay.
The whole time.
And then your dad, when you were growing up, was quite skeptical and agnostic. So when did you start to get into the New Agey stuff and the kind of abandon the Christianity, whatever Christian elements you had, full sail?
Yeah.
For the life force.
So
people from California. So.
Yeah. So there was this spiritual event that was very, So there was this spiritual event that was very, cataclysmic, I think, for, the certain people in my family. And that was when I was in the 4th grade. And I wound up being pulled along on this journey, not knowing anything. I don't even know how to describe this in a way without giving away details that aren't really mine to give, but very close family members had this spiritual experience that seemed very real. And now looking back on it, this was actually one of the hardest things to come to terms with in my conversion, realizing that I don't think it was from the good guys that this experience came, because it drove everyone who was part of it away from the church.
It wasn't from the happy team.
It wasn't from the happy team. It was from the enemy. And I always come back, and I can't think of what book it's in, but, you will know them by their fruits. Was that Matthew, maybe? I can't remember. And I, thinking about the fruits of that spiritual experience, everybody left the church. So that isn't a good fruit. Just want to be left alone, let the world pass them by. So that happened when I was in 4th grade. But then I think they realized that maybe they shouldn't be talking about this stuff, and it was upsetting to other families members, especially those who were still practicing Catholic. So everything was there. A lid was put on it. And nothing religious or spiritual was spoken about for 3 or 4 years. I guess 3 years. Because I remember coming home from school in 7th grade, and I felt so different from everybody else in school. Everybody else was talking about, was it better to wear regular mascara or clear mascara? Or whatever they bought at Delia's, or I don't know, what was on Nick at Night, and a TGIF or whatever. Snick. That's what I'm thinking of, Snick. Did they watch all that last weekend? And I just felt like I was thinking about other things. I was thinking about bigger things. And when I mentioned this to a family member, instead of, looking back, of course, hindsight is, especially when it comes to, especially when it comes to my faith life, is even better than 2020. It's like, eagle-eyed fighter pilot vision. It would have been so great when I came to feel like I was feeling so different, that it would have been wonderful if somebody had said, you know why you feel different? Because the stuff that everybody else cares about right now is of this world. You're being called to holiness. Let's talk about the Catholic Church more. Let's talk about some saints that felt like that too and made a difference, but didn't abandon their friends for thinking differently, but instead tried to guide them to something greater. Instead, I got told, well...
Apologies again for the brief interruption. We had a hungry baby. So we're back. All right, so pick up where we left.
So instead, when I told this person that I felt different from everybody else, instead of making it productive, it was suddenly the spiritual things that the spiritual things that the experience that had happened several years prior was again told to me, because I was in 4th grade. What do I really remember of it? And at that point, it really felt like something had unlocked. It felt right. Everything that was being told to me about this spiritual experience and this past that our family had. And I went with it. And of course, then I feel different because I am different and I'm better than anybody else. And around that time, I was having dreams that seemed to come true. They did come true. A lot of ways they did come true. And I messed around with the Ouija boards, and I just think it's so interesting. One of my best friends and I played with the Ouija board at her house. And sure enough, it said very explicitly two things that did wind up coming true. It mentioned like an earthquake or something on a specific date that did happen a couple months later. And then it did mention a schoolmate of ours would die, and he did about 10 years later. So, and we asked, how many spirits are in the room with us right now? And I can't remember whatever number it was. But looking back on it now, it just amazes me that neither of us thought to ask, are you good spirits?
Are you nice?
Are you nice? We just were like amazed.
These guardian angels?
That we seem to, or these demons. We were just amazed that we seemed to tap into something, and some truth of the universe was willing to speak to us. Mm-hmm. And then again, we must be different, because who else is getting this sort of information? That turned out to be true. And dreams were coming true at the time too. So I felt very connected to something outside of this world. I felt like I had secret knowledge. And over the course of time, I mean, as the dreams kept coming, and I certainly more than once that I got accused of having a holier than thou attitude towards people, and they were absolutely right, which I waved them off by saying, well, I knowledge that nobody else seems to have.
And it's a very Gnostic thing, this idea of having special privileged knowledge.
And that's exactly what I thought I had. So as time went on, and it seemed like I was special and different, I started acting that way. And, thinking back, I don't remember always being selfish. But as the years went on, I became just like the other people in my family who continued down this path of, tapping into their spiritual experiences and getting away from the church. Became more isolated, just wanted to be left alone. I moved around a lot, and I would never make friends. Like, what's the point? I'm just going to leave anyway. Like, I just had wings and no roots. And I didn't want any, because that meant that people would need something of me, and I was not willing to give up my spiritual secrets or whatever I felt like I was special.
So then, about these spiritual secrets, if somebody would have asked you about your general beliefs at the time, how would you have described it?
That's good. Well, I believe in reincarnation for sure.
So definitely a lot of Eastern-ish influence.
Yeah, very New Age. Yeah, so reincarnation was a thing, but then, and then also I believe that the world was going to end. It was big on. It's funny because I really hated the rapture talk, but then I was really, really interested in the end of the world stuff.
Your own apocalypse.
Yeah, and that's what we were all waiting. So the idea was that I think, it's so funny because it's all so subjective. I could have believed anything, but I would have been right.
It would have made sense to you.
It would have made sense to me. So the world was going to come to an end. I've been alive on different lives on Earth and maybe other planets before. Over time, I've refined my spirit over time, so I'm more advanced than I used to be in previous lives. And the world is probably going to end soon. And most to be in previous lives. And the world is probably going to end soon. And most people will probably just be obliterated. And only the special few will be left. It's very funny.
So we got some rapture-y stuff going on. We got some like annihilationism.
But
we've got a good mix of we got some nice heresies in there.
Absolutely.
We've got some Eastern influence. We got reincarnation going on. Maybe a little astral projection on the side, perhaps.
Always read my horoscope. Big on the horoscope. And big on, but it's funny because I would go and occasionally I would say I was at the state fair and somebody said they were reading crystals or reading palms. I'd be like, all right, let me see if you actually know who I am. So I would sit down and pay the $10 and I'm like, try me. I bet you can't crack how special and spiritual I am. And the most spiritual. It's just so terrible. Such a terrible person. I believed because anything, if I changed my beliefs, that would have just meant that I was being given special privilege and knowledge, and I was refining what I knew to be true with what actually was true.
So you could never have been wrong.
No, the universe was, because as I was going along, the universe was revealing new aspects of the truth to me.
So it didn't matter if one thing contradicted a previous thing. This was just all part of your special revelation.
Right.
Interesting. And I guess the other interesting thing about that is, the whole idea of reincarnation. I was talking about this with Aaron, my buddy Aaron, the other day, and he kind of believed the same things previously. And I think a similar note between the two of you is he now looks back as that being highly morally problematic, because he could always write off any behavior he did as saying, "Oh, well, I'll just do better next time."
I actually multiple times I would have said to somebody, if you learn from it, then it's not a mistake. So I could have really hurt somebody's feelings, but like, well, I learned not to do that, so I won't do that again. So it's not a mistake that I did that time because I learned and grew from it. Mm-hmm. So I was the most cavalier towards other people, didn't give a rat's behind.
Yeah, because if you have an infinite number of tries to, what was the end goal, I guess, of your beliefs? Was it some type of enlightenment, some type of...
Yeah, it would have been something similar to coming back to the Garden of Eden.
But
after the world ended.
In any type of Christian form.
No, that's a funny thing.
Very
so
interesting.
Yeah, so all
but
the
this is new agey stuff. It's all over the place.
Oh,
and it's never precise.
No, it's a constant moving target of what's correct, and no matter what you change to, that's correct because you have received new knowledge from the universe. So your spirit has advanced enough to have more knowledge revealed to it.
Yeah, and
I hurt the people because if they got hurt by something I did, well, that's their problem on their spiritual journey. I'm forging ahead on mine. They just have to deal with it.
Yeah, and this is such a this is one of such of the dangers of the spiritual but not religious, is that people don't seem to be able to critically self-reflect and realize that if your religious or spiritual beliefs are never challenging you in any way, but they constantly conform to whatever your political ideology is at the time, whatever your personal preferences are at the time, you think that would be at least an opportunity to wonder, maybe I'm just making this up as I go along. Maybe this isn't as authentic as it could be. But that is it's not just you. I mean, this really is because on the surveys where people check that they're nuns, NONES, right, that they have no religious affiliation. I was talking about this with Marcus Grodi. Yes, right, that they have no religious affiliation. I was talking about this with Marcus Grodi. Atheism is not on the rise. Like, proper atheism isn't. It's still a statistical minority. It always will be. Because even if somebody checks atheist on one survey, if you then ask them, okay, do you still believe in like some higher purpose in life, some like life force, then they'll almost always say yes. So they're really just like marking atheist or not religiously affiliated to mean that they aren't Christian. But if you just probe a little bit deeper, things very much like you're talking about seem to be the common thread. I believe in some principle, some force, or just the universe is so common now. People just really going right back to paganism and pantheism.
Yeah, and it's funny because this is what I believed as a spiritual but not religious person. But the next person who checks the box and says that they are spiritual but not religious,
they had their kind of stoic framework. But nobody in there had a consistent worldview with anybody else. It was all kind of all over the place.
Yeah. So who is right? I would have said that I was right because I'm the most enlightened or close to it out of anybody in the room. Back when I was this way. But how can you have millions of people walking around who it's not all right. One person who believes in reincarnation, other person who doesn't and believes that their body is just. There's no soul in there. It's just going to get obliterated at the end of their life. Like, who was right in all this?
Yeah, it's mutually conflicting. Right? Yeah. If one is true, the other can't be true. It's like if somebody is annihilated upon death, then hell or the afterlife or reincarnation just isn't the case, right? It's A or not. And yeah, it is interesting. I guess I didn't spend enough time in that world. It was kind of a very passing, fleeting phase, like sort of. And I tried to study the more time in that world. It was kind of a very passing, fleeting phase, like sort of. And I tried to study the more sophisticated versions, I think, of the idea of religious pluralism, which most people aren't. They're just kind of picking up that. I can't even tell you any of these, what the books are.
Yeah, don't even bother.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, they're not worth it.
But I guess going back to the point of the dangers of you will be able to judge something by its fruit. For you said that this really increased narcissism in some ways, isolationism, so you become more prideful, less other-oriented. Is really kind of the reverse of the fruits of the Spirit in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, how many times people have accused me of being icy and standoffish? Well, it's a very accurate accusation. I absolutely was. I would also be very scared that if I stuck around someplace or somebody for too long, they would find out the truth that I wasn't as amazing as I thought. My self-esteem wasn't great in the long run. Like it was just all a conflict. It was just a constant conflict. And also, you mentioned StoicCon, so we were there to listen to a friend of ours who is a very strong Catholic speak on how Stoicism had affected his life. Mm-hmm. But we were surrounded by other people who, most of them I would imagine, were not Catholics. I think one person who had a question did mention that they were Catholic and had just stumbled upon Stoicism. But what I noticed the most out of all these people who were in the room, and I was like, oh man, I've been there. They all had so many seeking questions. You could just tell they wanted answers, and they were hungry for it, and they were scared and probably tired. Mm-hmm. And that's where I was. There was something heroic and fascinating about always seeking, and there was something good about that. Like you're always looking for answers, and there was something good about that. Like you're always looking for answers and your way in life and the path, the truth, blah blah blah. And it was never really a goal to find the full truth. Like you wouldn't be able to find that in this life. Mm-hmm. There's the body is. The flesh is standing in the way of
a prison. Yeah,
it was a prison. Yeah. So I felt so much compassion for these people who, all the questions that they had. I was like, I know exactly where you can find a really good answer to that, and that's Catholicism. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until because that's not true. I had stopped seeking entirely and just resigned myself by the time I'd become a skeptic that all this was meaningless and there was nothing. We're just haphazard collision of atoms, and it was depressing. But I know exactly how that felt. Constantly asking questions, trying to find the truth, that it was just, again, a moving target. Mm-hmm. I'm so glad that's over now.
And Kev heard your conversation with
Or
him.
it will be the next episode.
Will be coming soon. Did a great job. Did a really nice job evangelizing and planting those seeds. I bet a number of people started Googling the Catholic Church after that talk. And you're right. You could tell they weren't satisfied with what they had. And of course, even as a Catholic, you're always seeking more, but you're satisfied. Like it's just like this is full. This is rich,
you know exactly what you're working towards.
Yes,
I'm working
just
towards
clarity.
Yeah, I'm working towards salvation. Well, I'm working towards I don't know, just
sainthood.
The sainthood. Thank you, sainthood. So the target isn't moving anymore. Now, what it takes to become a saint will change on a day-to-day basis in my life, given the circumstances. But the goal, I know that it's a very clear-cut goal, and I have rules now of how to get there and what not to do, and how to stay right with God, and when I mess up, how to get back on. So I think in my old way of thinking, there was one true path that I was supposed to be on. But then, I would occasionally get off on the access road or something off to the side. It might be a little bumpy, or maybe there's a pothole, or maybe I go way off track and I'm in the weeds. Eventually I would find my way back on. And then usually I would assume that a dream would come up or I'd have deja vu, which meant that I was on the right path. That's why I had the deja vu. I was where I was exactly meant to be at that moment. So I felt better, like maybe I'm not veering off as much as I thought I was, blah, blah, blah. So I never knew if I was following the right rule, that there were rules. Was I doing the right things to get to nirvana or whatever the heck?
Wherever you're going. Yeah.
Wherever I was, my ultimate end. But yeah, at least now with the Catholic faith, I have a set of rules. I have great examples. I've got a God who loved me so much that he died so that I would know all this. And also know all this. And also realize, I love, I did the Marian consecration, the original one from the 1600s or whenever it was with St. Louis de Montfort. And this wording cracks me up. It might not be a really great starter point if you're coming into the Catholic faith to hear that you're just a worm. But I had been, studying Catholicism for long enough at that point. I had a full understanding of original sin versus my inherent dignity and worth and how much God loves me. So being called a worm from Demal 4 was
calling himself a worm, right? Or in prayer. So you say the prayer that his prayers are pretty funny.
Yeah, they are.
I'm lower than the lowliest cockroach, my Lord.
But you know what? It's true. It's so true. And I spent so much of my life thinking that I was above all that I was better than everybody else, that I don't even know if I was on working my way to be at the same level as whatever created me. And that was most likely some universal life force or whatever. But I was on my way there. And I was one of the best and the brightest of all the spirits and blah, blah, blah. So but again, I made horrible mistakes and I hurt people and I hurt myself and I refused to acknowledge any of that at the time. But looking back, I'm like, yeah, man, I was without God. I am a lowly worm. But thankfully, I have God, and I have inherent worth and dignity, and I can become a saint, or at least get my start on that path in this life, and hopefully make it to heaven in the next.
Beautiful. And I suggested that this could, if you'll have me back on, make a really good series on this whole spiritual but not religious thing, because even though it's, I think, deeply incoherent, there's a lot there, a lot of just to kind of jam around and, come at it from a couple of different angles, not just theologically, but also philosophically, because like you said, a lot of this stuff just doesn't make sense.
No, absolutely not. And I wouldn't have done it. But the thing is, too, and we've talked about this, Pat, about evangelization, how as much as you would hope that people would love to hear the rationale behind why God exists and why the Catholic Church, et cetera, it really comes down to emotion for a lot of people. Yeah. And everything that I ever did or believed in just filled me up emotionally, or at least on the surface. It's Chinese food versus a good steak dinner.
The other thing that I'll mention here as we wrap up is we've been in a little group that's been studying confessions. So if anybody hasn't read that, it's great because, how relevant it is. It really just highlights. You see all the same things of what's going on in culture today with the spiritual but not religious. Augustine just highlights them.
I was going to say he followed the Manichaeism heresy, right? Right, wasn't that
one of the Manichaean? Yep.
Yeah, so that's where the body is a prison, right? The flesh is foul.
It's
and you're trying to escape that. Is that?
It's literally modern New Age.
Yeah, I was like, that's exactly what I felt before.
Which goes to show is we think that society has evolved, right? Where we've gone above these crude religious institutions. No, it's devolved. We've just gone back. It's just neo-paganism. It's all these religions that we did evolve from because of the revelation of God, because of the Catholic Church. And we've just been slipping back. So I think it'd be very enlightening for people just to go back and read Confessions. Read Augustine, who back in the 4th century, you would think you're just reading a critique of the modern times, honestly. Yep.
Well, yes, I'm working my way through Rod Bennett's book, The Four Witnesses. And when he's talking about Ignatius, he's very good about setting the stage of the time that we're in during the time that we're in during when Ignatius was martyred. And the way he explained Roman day-to-day life, it sounded a lot like today. I was like, oh, we haven't changed, have we?
Eerily similar. Yeah. No new heresies.
No, there really aren't, are there?
No new heresies.
Which is a good thing.
New people.
Yeah, which is a good thing, which means that you're not fighting anything new when you're trying to battle this stuff, either with in your own, as you work through your own belief or disbelief, or with other people. It's all been done, and very intelligent people have refuted it.
Yeah. Well, this has been a lovely conversation, Christine. Thank you so much for coming on The Catholic Mama.
And remind people to write a review.
Oh, thank you. Gentle listener, dear gentle listener, if you are enjoying the Catholic Mama podcast and all the hard work that my wife does on this show, please consider supporting it by leaving a very nice, overly fawning, sappy iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. Those positive 5-star reviews really help to spread the word. So if you get value out of this, honestly, from my heart, I love what my wife is doing. It makes me so happy. She really does work so hard to put these on. So thank you for listening. Thank you for all the support.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.